It is a Serengeti in the sky. And yet, this remote mountain called Mount Todagin was once the ocean's floor. An ancient seabed vaulted into the sky upon the shoulders of warring mountain ranges. Here, on this alpine plateau mowed close by relentless winds, life subsists on the narrowest of margins. And yet, this inhospitable landscape nurtures an exotic species of mountain sheep called stone sheep, which are providing clues to how the influence of geology affects the very foundations of genetics. This is the story of a unique mountain in Canada's northwest called a Serengeti in the sky for its rich diversity of wildlife. It is a story written in stone. But it is also the story of an epic conflict for the native peoples who have used this mountain for millennia. And it is one of the grand ironies of the 21st century that the very minerals which attract the stone sheep may also cause them to abandon Mount Todagin forever. Mount Todagin is located in northwestern British Columbia, sandwiched between the Rocky Mountains to the east and the coastal range to the west. It is a high alpine plateau region, the result of layer upon layer of sedimentation, sand, silt. Ancient swamps turned to coal, great seabeds where ammonites the size of bicycle tires once roamed. It is one of the largest mountain boreal wildernesses remaining on the planet. National Geographic explorer in residence, Wade Davis, was first attracted to the area in the 1970s, settling with his family on E. Louis Lake at the base of Mount Todagin.
One of the things that makes Todagin so remarkable is that it compresses in an incredibly, relatively small area all the features upon which wildlife depend. Now that said, when you walk up to it and you crest the skyline and you get through the skirt of black spruce and white spruce that forms the boreal forest of this area, you suddenly feel that you're in heaven, because you see these rolling vistas, Scottish-like in their beauty, that seem in the moment to be endless. But as you walk around, readily circumnavigating the entire massif in a matter of days, you suddenly begin to see that it's got everything a wild animal would want. Heavy mineralization, good for the horns of the sheep. Any number of habitats for food. It has, remarkable calving grounds. And the very fact that it has these sort of bluffs and cliff faces that become perfect places for the animals to retreat to give birth. And of course, because it is this sort of open, wide, sweeping mesa of a plateau, it is windswept in the winter. And so the harsh winds of winter blow away the snow from this, the fodder upon which the animals depend. Sedges and grasses rich in protein. And so it's not only an incredibly rich site for the wildlife, all of this sort of drama is compressed in a remarkably small area. And the other incredible thing about Todagin, tell me where on earth there is a place where you can slap on your boots on the highway and walk up a beautiful trail and in 2 hours be on an open plateau literally covered with wildlife, where you are guaranteed the opportunity to walk with the wolves, to walk with the grizzly bear, to follow the stone sheep. When my little girls were little, they didn't even realize how lucky they were. We would always go up Todagin, and I would be able to take them. They had names for individual rams that they would see up there. You could take them with such certainty. And I remember once I got stuck up there in a storm, and I simply crawled into a wolf den, and before I knew it, all these wolves were coming back. I mean, where on earth can you do that? The wildlife values, in fact, are so extraordinary that long ago, the government, in its wisdom, prohibited any hunting with rifles on the mountain. If you want to hunt on Todagin, you must carry a bow. And indeed, the calving areas on the southern flank of Todagin, overlooking Todagin River, have long been a wildlife protected area, a provincial park.
Todagin is a citadel, an island carved from the landscape by erosion and glaciation. Then, necklaced by a chain of interconnecting lakes that encircle the mountain before weaving into a single strand, the Stickeen River. The evolution of life on this mountain began with the wind. Over time, the wind slowly deposited on the once barren surface the first particles of soil and nutrients until spores and seeds took hold, turning it into a tapestry of botanical life. With vegetation came the birds and fish in the lakes and rivers that ring the mountain. Soon herbivores migrated onto the slopes, following the receding snowfields. They, in turn, were followed by omnivores and then by carnivores. Slowly, the web of interdependency grew in complexity until the whole was far more than the sum of its parts, becoming a functioning system with a life of its own. On a planet where intact natural ecosystems are vanishing at an alarming rate, a functioning system that isn't influenced by man has become tragically rare. Mount Todagin is a rich theater of characters. Some hold stage the year round, other performers only play summer stock. Birds, like the eagle soaring over Todagin or the ptarmigan defending her chicks, are the most far-ranging of the mountain's inhabitants, while the rodents are the most common. Marmots, for example, are top dogs over Todagin's rodent kingdom of ground squirrels and chipmunks. But rodents play a key role in the mountain's function. Marmots are foremost diggers, latticing the mountain with a complex system of tunnels for safety from predators. In turn, rodents are a mainstay of the carnivores, like wolves. Moose and caribou are continually moving vagabonds on the plateau. Their passing often marked only by shed antlers. Mountain goats are the guardians of Todagin, inhabiting the steep walls and vertical canyons of the escarpment that encircles the mountain. Todagin is also prime grizzly country. And because grizzly hibernate through the winter, all they know of the mountain is summer abundance. Grizzly are omnivores, their diet running from fresh grass shoots to the odd marmot, and maybe, if the fog is thick enough and the wind blowing right, a stone sheep. It is puzzling why, given a grizzly's heavy coat, that on a summer day so hot that heat snakes slither from the land, they will lay out in the open sunning themselves. The answer is, it is because of his fur coat. The fur blocks the sun from reaching a grizzly's skin, while the wind blows through it, nature's air conditioner. And a hot summer day becomes a picnic. the pivotal tenet on Mount Todagin, the one who pays the harsh dues of winter, is the stone sheep. Still, for their suitability with their rock habitat, they are also the most vulnerable to the ultimate predator, man.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
From above, Stone Sheep's range mirrors the boundaries of the Great Northern Plateau, extending from the Rockies to the coastal range and north to the Yukon. Named after naturalist Andrew Stone, the stone sheep are a distinctly different species from the iconic bighorn sheep of the Rockies, or even their nearest neighbors, the Dall sheep of the Yukon. Todagin has numerous attractions for stone sheep. Foremost is the terrain itself. Open grasslands, salted with rock outcrops and cliffs, perfect escape havens. The rock outcrops are defensible islands of safety, places to birth their lambs away from predators. Salt minerals are essential to horn growth. There are not many defined licks on Todagin because the mountain itself is one big salt lick. Each stream and pond a ready source of minerals. Also, the wind is a key attraction as it exposes the lichen, sedges, grasses necessary to feed the sheep through fall and winter. But it is also a symbiotic relationship. For just as the mountain suits the sheep, the stone sheep are suited for the mountain. For example, their best defense against the ravages of winter wind is their hair and hide. Sheep hair is a combination of fur and long hair coupled with thick hide. When seen through an electron microscope, each hair is a thermal tube that transfers heat along its length. The difference between the brutally cold ambient temperatures with a wind chill and the inside of their body cavity is 100 degrees Celsius. Above all things, stone sheep are foremost sheep, and like domestic sheep, they are social animals that are programmed to follow. Also, like most ungulates, animals that have multiple stomachs, stone sheep spend much of their time either grazing or chewing their cud. Correspondingly, rank has privilege, down to the best bedding sites. When a dispute does arise, the results are impressive but seldom lethal. The sheep on the edge of the cliff is laying where she doesn't belong. Suddenly, an older ewe, with proprietorship to the prime bed on the edge of a precipice, rousts the interloper out of her bed. Both male and female stone sheep have horns. The females are long and straight like stilettos, while the males have an iconic curve, either the cause or consequence of headbutting. Sheep hooves are marvelously adapted to rock climbing. The hard outer cuticles of the toes are designed to hook onto the slightest rock protrusion, while the pads on the back are like sandpaper, giving them purchase on polished surfaces. Do mountain sheep fall? Probably. But as shown by this ewe's misstep, their ability to recover is remarkable. Still, it is not uncommon to see crippled mountain sheep, whether by misstep or predator attack. For wild sheep, another key factor to survival from predators is speed and mobility. As a consequence, cripples are often left behind because they can't keep up. Here, a crippled ewe with a healthy lamb teams up with a healthy ewe whose lamb has been injured on its left foreleg. Still, judging by the lamb's adjustment to his handicap, mountain sheep, like cats, are born with 3 legs and a spare. The most identifiable characteristic of stone sheep from other North American mountain sheep is their coloration. And though their body color varies widely between individuals, their white faces and white rump with a black tail is universal. Both stone sheep and Dall are members of an elite class of wild sheep called thinhorn. There are distinct differences between them. They are not as stocky, nor are their horns as robust as the bighorn rams. With DNA analysis, scientists can discover and map the evolutionary history of these subspecies.
I'm a professor at the University of Alberta in the Department of Biological Sciences. My research specialty is wildlife genetics, which means that I use the tools of molecular biology, which means to decode the genetic blueprint of organisms and use that to understand things about how their populations are organized, what different genes play a role in how their phenotype or how their outward appearance is expressed, and what are the evolutionary relationships between different groups of organisms. And I'm particularly interested in mountain sheep and goats. So the way we can connect the dots with evolutionary history and DNA is we can look at how the sequence of DNA that characterizes one species or one organism is related to another one. And we do this across many different types of organisms, and we can use that to reconstruct a tree, if you like, a tree of life, which gives us an illustration of the historical evolutionary relationships between groups of taxa. So if we wanted to know, for example, the closest relative of humans based on DNA, we would look to see what sequences are most similar to humans. For example, Dall sheep, stone sheep, bighorn sheep have some conspicuous differences, but they obviously share a recent common evolutionary history. I mean, they more or less look the same. They have big horns, and they may be dark or they may be light. What DNA analysis can tell us in more detail, though, is it can give us a more, I think, a more finely resolved picture of what the relationships between those species were in the past. So where is the common ancestor between them?
Samples of the mitochondria of stone, Dall, and bighorn sheep are collected and prepared for analysis. To get the exacting genotypic relationships, the samples are then sent to a sophisticated laboratory, where as many as 700,000 genome sites can be analyzed.
My name is Sim Ji Zhen, and I'm a graduate student here at the University of Alberta from the Department of Biological Sciences. My graduate work involves the use of DNA evidence to look at the conservation genetics and evolutionary history of wild sheep in North America. And my research is funded by the BC Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation. The evolution of wild sheep in North America, it really tells the story of repeated glaciation that occurred in the Pleistocene glaciations of North America. What we think happened was that the ancestors of wild sheep in North America came over, and thinhorn sheep and bighorn sheep evolved separately due to isolation from the advancements of glaciers. We know that glaciations resulted in bighorn sheep and thinhorn sheep, but then subsequent glaciations also resulted in a split between thinhorn sheep into its 2 subspecies, the Dall sheep, which has a white coat, which are presumably more adapted to the more wider background of northern North America, and the darker stone sheep, which helps it camouflage better in the more colored landscapes of southern North America or northern BC. The use of DNA, and it enables us to classify or have a clear classification of the subspecies status of thin-horned sheep, even though they live right next to each other, because when they were isolated by glaciation, they experienced different environments, and therefore their DNAs evolved differently. And once they've come back into contact with each other, the DNA still bears the legacy of the difference in the environments that they were isolated in during the glacial periods.
Wild domestic sheep are smaller than mountain sheep. During the fall rut, all mountain sheep enact a ritual of courtship more bizarre than any devised by man. But while the sound of impact can be heard from a kilometer away, their skulls are designed for impact. At the base of the horns is a thick plate, and another around the brain, with a spongy lattice buffer between that acts much as a shock absorber in a car. Time on Mount Todagin is marked by the rotation of the seasons. And miraculously, out of the carnage of winter, life springs anew. With the receding snow, the mountain blooms. Unfortunately, the warm weather also brings hordes of insects. Mosquitoes with a hunger and flies with a vengeance drive sheep into a malaise of crankiness, causing even the best of friends to come to horns. Spring lambing occurs in, or very near, the safety of the cliffs, as is the case with this ewe and her newborn lamb. Besides life itself, the next greatest miracle is instinct. Written in a code somewhere between DNA and her mother's hock, there is a miraculous script of instinct directing the newborn. This lamb is only 2 hours old. There is afterbirth left on the ewe's leg, and the lamb's umbilical cord is still attached to his belly. Driven purely by instinct, the lamb tries to suckle. When you're only a few hours old, it is all pretty confusing. Finally, the target is found, and the instinct to suckle takes over. The first day of a lamb's life is its hardest, for not only must it master standing and feeding, but within hours it must be mobile. It is like walking on stilts with elbows in the most troublesome places. Running is more like hopping. But the transition from stumbling to running is a matter of minutes. And soon, the lamb is keeping up with its mother as she leads her offspring to the sanctuary of the cliffs. After a few days of bonding, ewes and lambs join other maternity ewes, and suddenly, play becomes the lamb's main pursuit. Spring also brings out the prankster in ravens. Hey, you sitting on my rock. My rock. No, man, this is my rock. Ask anyone on Todagin. They'll tell you this is my rock. My rock. Okay, you won't play rough? How about a peck on the tail? Hey, that hurt. My rock, you molting raptor. Now what are you up to? All right, you dumb bird, your rock. Dumb bird? Who you calling dumb bird? Take that! Ow! Okay, now you're gonna get it. Where'd you learn to fly, Eagle? Ow! Come back here! Eagle, come back here! You come back here! Spring also is the season of the switch, the costume change. And just as ptarmigan go through their annual molt, it is the time for the sheep to shed their thick, heavy shag coats for sleek summer attire. While both ewes and yearling rams stay with the maternity bands, the older rams hang with the gang, doing gang things like butting heads. Summer, for all of Todagin's inhabitants, is both the easiest and yet the most critical season. For it is then that they must lay in stores of fat that will carry them into winter. Fall is the highlight of mountain sheep's social calendar. It is the time of the rut, the breeding period, a time to score and settle scores. Many animals on the plateau hibernate, including the resident grizzly. Sometimes they will find marmot holes they've excavated over the summer and expand them until the bear can crawl inside for his long winter nap. For the wolves, there is no reprieve, as they are forced daily to range for food in packs. Wolves have no natural predators except the elements themselves. For most animals who lack options to hibernate or migrate, winter is the hardest of all seasons. But it can also be a time of overplenty, like a whole moose carcass for this pine marten family. The relationship between the northern native peoples, Mount Todagin, and its stone sheep have been intricately interlaced for thousands of years. Mountain sheep were not only a delicacy, but also a subject of art, and often practical utensils. Their horns were made into ornate tools like spindle pads, ceremonial spoons, and ladles. Also, Todagin was right on the main trading trail network between the Pacific and the prairie.
All through here were trails to the interior, the highways that carried the First Nations from the coast of British Columbia, which as a crow flies is about 150 kilometers to the west, all through to an area of land that reaches all the way to the Rocky Mountain Trench.
But Todagin was coveted not just for its access, or even its abundance of wildlife. Another central attraction of the mountain is its proximity to the obsidian fields on Mount Todagin.
And so if you go up Todagin and you look to the west, you suddenly see the sacred mountain of the tall town, Idzaidza, which was really not just sort of an icon in the imagination of the Tahltan people. And of course, Idzaidza was also the source of the very wealth of the Tahltan people. The volcanic glass, the obsidian, which became this motherlode of wealth. On Idzaidza, there are areas where you can walk for kilometers at a time and have 25% of the ground cover at your feet, pure shards of obsidian. There are places where the lenses crack open and the glaciers have tumbled down these great boulders of volcanic glass the size of my arms here. And of course, obsidian is the sharpest known substance to man. And we know for a fact that the obsidian from Idzaidza traded west as far as Haida Gwaii, east across the Rockies to the Great Plains, south possibly as far as California. In fact, we don't even really know the extent of that trade. We do know that it was the foundation of the wealth of the Tahltan people.
Because obsidian can be worked into tools with razor-sharp edges, such as arrowheads, spearheads, and skinning knives, it revolutionized the hunting habits of early man. Suddenly, they had a material that could slice through even the toughest hides. Obsidian became a trading commodity more valuable than gold, establishing new trails of commerce that spiderwebbed across Western Canada and into the United States. Isolated from European influence, the Indigenous people of the interior continued to live the life of their ancestors until the middle of the 20th century. But suddenly, that would all change as the Tahltan territory, including Todagin, became overrun with prospectors, miners, and finally, mining companies.
Who have more rights? Human rights or corporate rights? This society is going wrong somewhere. If corporate rights have more rights than human rights, man, this society is going wrong somewhere.
Though a few Europeans had ventured into the region as early as the late 1800s, the Red Chris mineral claim on Mount Todagin wasn't staked until the mid-1950s. What the early miners found was a bluff on the north side of the mountain that was low-grade copper but high volume, meaning you had to move a lot of mountain for a little pure ore.
I've often thought that if all of us were more directly responsible for the impacts we have in the natural world, I mean, this gold wedding ring, which I sort of wear happily as a symbol of the love I have for my wife, if I didn't have this ring, I would still love my wife. And to produce this one bit of gold took roughly 30 tons of rock torn from the earth. Now, if I had to live with those 30 tons in my backyard and the toxic tailings associated with the production of this little bit of gold, you know, in the bedroom of my child, I might think twice before buying a gold ring. And I think if we thought in those terms, we would begin to be more aware and sensitive to what the impacts that our lives have on the planet.
But early assays of the Red Chris claim indicated marginal copper, and it was a long way from markets. Titles to mineral rights changed hands with the regularity of a stone sheep shedding its winter coat. But as drill programs probed deeper into the strata, they profiled a pocket of high-grade silver and gold far below. One company, American Bullion, explored the possibility of tunneling to the high grade versus an open pit, and concluded that the cost return was near equal. The trade-off was that the return on capital investment for an open pit was shorter, but the environmental damage was significantly more than the tunnel. But both options were more than the company wanted to undertake, and again, the claim was sold. Finally, Imperial Metals, a company that specializes in open pit mining, took over the claim, and the tunnel option was abandoned. In comparison with tunnel mining, open pit mines have three problems. The first is the permanent loss of surface and wildlife habitat. Today, land that took hundreds of thousands of years to create can be destroyed with giant excavators in a matter of hours. The second problem is of the sheer activity of open pit mining upon the local inhabitants. 28 years of daily shelf dynamiting, for example, is not conducive to hibernation. But there is a far greater concern than the loss of surface, shelf dynamiting, or just grumpy bears. And that is the effect of the displacement of resident species such as mountain sheep, in particular, ewe lamb units.
One of the reasons understanding this genetic structure is important because it's important to how we manage these populations or these groups of sheep. So if we know that a group of animals on a particular mountain are genetically distinct from the next mountain, and those animals are likely to be genetically well matched to that environment through natural selection over many generations, has led for their genetic material to be well attuned to the environment in which you find them. We call that being locally adapted. If we make a change in that environment, for example, we introduce a mine that maybe forces those animals to move, or when we reclaim the mine, it might make a habitat that actually draws animals in from surrounding areas. It disturbs that genetic structure. So it brings animals that may not be locally adapted to that a new environment in, or vice versa. It forces animals that are locally adapted to move away and to take with them their genetic variants to an environment that maybe is not well suited. So any of those kinds of changes, dramatic changes in habitat, and climate change is one of the big examples of this, which happens across huge areas, of course, is that animals are no longer locally adapted to that environment. The environment changes, they're no longer well matched to it, which may cause them problems in the future. Long-term persistence, long-term viability may be threatened because they now mismatch that environment, which over many millennia they've become locally adapted to. And compounding this is the fact that these changes happen very quickly. Human-induced change happens much more quickly than evolution could ever possibly track.
The critical issue is water. Rocks with even very low levels of sulfides, when exposed to air and rain or melting snow, can produce sulfuric acid in the drainage from the site, becoming a highly toxic time bomb that can damage or eliminate aquatic life in the downstream ecosystem. As a consequence, tailings have to be impounded on ponds or lakes, often, as in the case of Mount Todagin, in a pristine lake, at the very headwaters of a 9-lake chain. Finally, the Todagin waterways flow all the way to the Pacific.
Radical is lopping off the top of a mountain and pouring it down into a couple of lakes is radical. Trying to stop them is not.
It was January 2005 in Telegraph Creek, British Columbia, when an 85-year-old Tahltan elder named Roy Kwok discovered that his pro-development tribal chief had signed, without the Tahltan people's knowledge, agreements of intent with half a dozen mining and petroleum companies, including Red Chris property on Mount Todagin. Enough is enough became the mantra of the Tahltan elders, immediately demanding their chief's resignation and a moratorium on all resource development projects until everyone was consulted. Internationally renowned carver and recipient of the Order of Canada, Dempsey Bob, was one of the first elders to join the sit-in.
We got to stand up now. Our people got to stand up for our land. Our land is sacred. It's sacred to our people. This land was given to us by God to look after. That's why we have to do what we have to do. Our culture is fishing, hunting, and our fish are very important to us. That's like the center of our culture. Because from the fish, there's eagles, there's ravens. The bears depend on the fish. If we lose our salmon, we lose all the animals. And that means the end of our culture. If this land is polluted, we got nowhere else to go. Those companies come from everywhere else in the world. They don't live here. We have to live here, and we have to survive after them.
Lillian Campbell, known as Tiger Lil, was one of the first occupiers of the Telegraph Creek Band office, and the last person to leave.
I was here from the beginning of the sit-in, January the 17th, and we've been here for 30 days, sleeping on the floor, and having food delivered to us to eat our lunch and our dinner. And we're still going to be here until we get some answers.
For 265 days, 24/7, the elders lived in the office, sleeping on the floor, eating prepared meals from the village and moose meat from the forest. The youngest elder was 65, and the oldest, 84. A blockade was set up by the Tahltan on the only access road to the mining claims, and a seasonal camp was built and maintained for the next 5 years. October 2005, the blockade was challenged by the mining companies. Lillian Campbell was the first to stop the advancing truck that was flanked by armed Mounties.
Look after your children. They're the future. Their unborn children is a generation. Don't let them go in there and do what they want to do. You may get away with this now. Later, I don't think so, because we are going to stand all together, tall and strong.
One by one, the elders stepped in front of the truck and were promptly arrested.
Come here, just put it on. Okay.
The blockade lasted for 5 years.
Kiss Mama. I love you.
At great social and financial cost to all sides.
All of this to produce a geochemical time bomb that will tick for the rest of eternity, and all of which will then threaten these lakes, and all of which will be left not in the hands of the descendants of these individuals who run this company, but in the hands of the elders of the Tahltan First Nation. Those people won't be here forever. These people will be here forever. And mitigation is forever. And they will have to deal with the consequences of this mine for the rest of their cultural history.
Our culture is our land. It's our river. It's our animals. It's us. We're all a part of it. And that's what's important, and that's what we're trying to preserve. Because once the animals are gone, we're next. There's nobody else. That's going to be the end. And if we say that if the native people lose the land, it's the end of the world. It's the end of, there'll be no more keepers on the land. We're like the guardians of the land. And that's what we're trying to do. That's why we're here. That's why my people are here.
In the end, the fate of Mount Todagin and the Sheep of Stone are caught in the grips of a dilemma of modern times. Since the Bronze Age, metals and mining have been the foundations of civilization. And yet today, we also embrace the idea that there should be some places left on the planet beyond human influence. Places like Mount Todagin, where the genetics by geology have crafted species over millennia, where we can learn about our planet's evolution through the study of their DNA.
If we actually step back and had any kind of standard whereby we measured the value of Todagin Mountain, this wildlife sanctuary in the sky, against the diminishing supplies of wildlife in Canada, the diminishing acreage of wild land around the world, we would realize that this is a jewel that all Canadians should be celebrating and embracing.
Ultimately, the resolution to the dilemma is not mining versus no mining, but rather how we do it. And in the future, we may find that some practices, such as open pit mining, are luxuries the earth can no longer afford. Meanwhile, the fate of Mount Todagin and its inhabitants hangs in the balance.
And the apple of my eye. When you come up from your office in the city, I will meet you at the river by and by. I cannot let this pass me